Back in March, I spoke to Kelsey Trainor about the US women's national team's ongoing legal struggles to achieve equal pay with their men's national team. Yesterday evening, news broke that the judge in the case had ruled in summary judgment. The result came as a shock to everyone. Today I'm rejoined by Kelsey, a lawyer, writer and producer, to talk through yesterday's revelations. Yesterday, Judge Gary Klosner of the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California released a partial summary judgment in the U.S. women's national team's lawsuit against the U.S. Soccer Federation, a lawsuit in which the U.S. women's national team was seeking compensation equal to that of the men's national team. What was the content of this summary judgment?
So the summary judgment was a 32-page order and opinion that basically dismissed the majority of the U.S. women's national team gender discrimination lawsuit before its trial, which is currently scheduled for June 16th, 2020. The players had two claims against U.S. Soccer. They had this Equal Pay Act claim, and they had this Title VII of the Civil Rights Act for gender discrimination. So what the judge did is he dismissed the entire Equal Pay Act claim, basically saying that the U.S. women's national team were not paid unequally compared to their male counterparts. And he dismissed the Title VII claim as to playing conditions. So as of right now, the only claim that remains is a Title VII claim concerning gender discrimination as to travel and accommodations, mainly being charter flights, and the personnel that's been provided to the teams, namely medical and training staff.
Remind us again quickly what a summary judgment is.
So summary judgment is a standard practice in federal court, and it's a way to get all or parts of the case dismissed or decided, depending on the issues, before trial.
Could you talk us through the substance of Gary Klosner's response? On what basis did he rule in favour of the USSF?
For the Equal Pay Act, the U.S. women's national team had to prove that they performed substantially equal work to the men and were then paid less based on that work. We know that U.S. Soccer has always argued that the men and women operate under completely different collective bargaining agreements that are structured differently. The women's contract had guaranteed compensation, severance pay, and other benefits, whereas the men's national team had lower pay, but they had larger performance bonuses. So the judge basically decided that the U.S. women's national team bargained for this contract. They had a chance at one point in the bargaining process to accept a contract with a pay structure similar to the men's national team. They didn't do that. So they can't now go back and take issue with the contract. He also said that the women's national team earned more money than the men's national team over this period of 2015 to 2019, where the women earned $221,000 per game and the men earned $213,000 per game. I know that people are taking issue with this because it doesn't take into account the success of the women's national team. So if you take the men's national team, and had they been successful like the women, they would have been paid at a far higher rate. And so this analysis that the judge did would not be the same analysis here. But the court had a response to that, and the judge said that you can't compare these two collective bargaining agreements because they have such a different structure and different preferences in pay.
So in essence then, this comes down, as you suggested it might in our original conversation, to the weight of the two collective bargaining agreements. The judge is effectively saying that you're using the men's collective bargaining agreement to argue that your own collective bargaining agreement is unfair, but this isn't how collective bargaining agreements work.
Yes, exactly.
So given that the judge is convinced enough by the evidence to throw this out before going to trial, why are there so many people who seem to be suggesting that the wrong decision has been made?
I think it's because, during their summary judgment arguments and in their briefs, U.S. Soccer made these controversial arguments, basically saying that women are inferior by birth. They have skills that are inferior by birth, and therefore they should be paid less due to that. That has damaged U.S. Soccer's public perception. So from that standpoint, I think people are not necessarily understanding that the legal differences versus the public perception differences. We knew all along that U.S. Soccer's strongest argument, legally and fundamentally, was that these were different collective bargaining agreements, and comparing them under the law was going to be very difficult. At the end of the day, there's the court of law and then there's the court of public opinion. and US soccer has not done themselves any favors in the court of public opinion.
Back in March, you seemed to think that a summary judgment finding was unlikely and that this could be settled out of court. How surprised were you at the revelations that this had been ruled on a summary judgment?
I was very surprised. Not necessarily like we talked about by the end result, but that it did happen on summary judgment, because summary judgment is such a high standard to meet. It's essentially the court saying that there are no issues of material fact to decide. And then based on everything that they have under the law, there's no way that the U.S. women's national team could win. So in this case, I do think it's interesting that this has been decided on summary judgment. And I think the best argument on the appeal for the players is that a lot of the facts that the judge decided could be considered material fact and that there's an issue to them, and that that's something that a jury should have decided and not the judge.
What has the general response been to this ruling?
Oh, geez. I think from a public perception standpoint, it's disheartening. This has been kind of like a moment in history, especially for women, where this lawsuit felt like a fight kind of for a better future. You have people all around the world who maybe don't know what this lawsuit means, but are still going around chanting equal pay, equal pay. So it's certainly a blow to that. From a legal perspective, the response that I've seen is that we knew that this was a very real possibility, but the fact that it came on summary judgment is a bit of a surprise to people.
What does the immediate future look like for the US women's national team's equal pay dispute?
So they can file a request for an interlocutory appeal or a motion for reconsideration. Interlocutory appeal is just a fancy way of saying that the case cannot be appealed as of right away. It's not a final order because the entire case was not dismissed. So they essentially have to get permission from the court to appeal the case now, as opposed to after the June 16th trial. They can also file a motion for reconsideration. That's unlikely to be granted because nobody, especially a judge, is likely to sit there and say, like, hey, I made a mistake on something that I literally just decided with a 32-page opinion and order. And so the trial is currently set for June 16th. There's the possibility of further delays due to COVID-19 and settlement. I think the next step for both sides should be to go to the negotiating table and find a middle ground. U.S. soccer needs to repair their reputation, the women need to get paid, and the trust between the two needs to be built back up because they will be entering a new collective bargaining agreement negotiation in the future.
Just for clarification, the trial that is currently set for June the 16th will simply deal with the only two remaining issues that weren't thrown out by the judge in summary judgment. Is that right?
Yeah, so it will only cover the Title VII claims as it relates to gender discrimination for travel, the charter flights, and player personnel. So in terms of the large pot of money that was at stake, the almost $67 million that players were seeking, that number is nowhere near there because a lot of that had to do with Equal Pay Act violations.
So how far back does this set soccer in the US? Is there any positive aspect to this whole situation?
I don't know that there are any winners. U.S. soccer has already spent millions to litigate this case. There's also the Hope Solo litigation that is very similar to this case that was put on hold pending the outcome of this one. So they've already spent a ton of money. They've already damaged their reputation severely. The players did not win, and a lot of the soccer community in the U.S. is really upset by everything that's happening. So I think the only positive aspect to come out of this is that hopefully the two sides enter negotiations for a settlement sooner rather than later.
Kelsey Trainor is a lawyer, writer and producer. This episode was produced by Josh Schneiderweiler. I'm John McKenzie. Thanks for listening to Football Today. If you enjoy this podcast, why not sign up to our Patreon account and get a raft of bonus material? Or, if you can't spare the cash, why not help us out by sharing an episode with a friend? See you next time.